Good morning, everybody. I'm Scott Corwin. I lead Deloitte's Global Future Mobility practice. We are delighted to have this panel today on advancing mobility innovation to create sustainable, inclusive, and thriving cities. On the panel today, we have three really good friends. Michelle Avary, who leads the Center for Autonomy and Urban Mobility at the World Economic Forum's Center for Fourth Industrial Revolution. Michelle and I have been working very closely over the last couple of years, and we'll talk about that. We have Ami Appelbaum, who's the chief scientist and the chairman of the Israeli Innovation Authority and a leading technologist with, what, 50 patents to your...
50 papers and 6 patents. That's enough.
Which is pretty impressive. And then we have Erez, who is the founder and CEO of Moovit. Nir has built, with his colleagues, one of the great mobility digital platforms. And Nir has also been part of the working group of our work with the World Economic Forum. Ami and Michelle are about to make an announcement. So this is really a bit incestuous in terms of our work with the World Economic Forum. So with that, I'd like to kick off, and I want to start really with an overarching set of themes to get into this topic. I thought I'd get the energy going. And a little bit of a build on the comments that Bill Ford made this morning. We're at an extraordinary stage in the evolution of mobility innovation and what it means for cities. We're seeing all of these new forms of mobility come to market. They create incredible opportunities. They're a little disconnected and maybe not completely synchronized. And so we want to get into, as the second part of this whole idea of seamless intermodal mobility and what it means for cities. And then the third part is to talk about what it's going to make, what's required to sort of accelerate and catalyze the advancement, or what are the big obstacles we're going to have to overcome. So the first question I want to ask, and Michelle does this to me every time we're together. She always turns to me first, so I'm really happy to have this opportunity to turn to you, Michelle. We've had an ongoing dialogue around the idea that mobility is a human right. And I'd like you to expand on whether you believe that, and if so, what does that mean? And it's built on Article 13 of the United Nations Declaration, right? And I would like you to sort of, in a few succinct words, kind of pick up on the dialogue you and I have been having on that topic.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm very honored to be here with everyone. I do believe that mobility is a human right. It's also the foundation of economic prosperity. When we think about the movement of people and the movement of goods, it's really important to be able to have that freedom to move, as the United Nations has codified in their, the UN Article 13. But also we know that when it comes to men and women equality, access to safe transportation and affordable transportation is essential. And we can think about the concept of universal basic income, which is providing a baseline of income. But if you flip that a little and make it universal basic mobility, as was articulated from the folks over in City Labs, you talk about the movement of people towards where there is economic opportunity as another side of that coin. And that's one of the areas that we look a lot at the World Economic Forum, is how can we provide safe, clean, sustainable mobility for everyone.
Do you maybe want to take 1 minute and talk about the work that you're doing on the council and how that fits? Give you a chance to do a little advertisement here.
Well, there are a couple of things that we're doing at the World Economic Forum. We do have the Global New Mobility Coalition, which is working specifically on clean, sustainable transportation, really looking at that intersection of alternative powertrains, high occupancy vehicles, and autonomy, and where you can combine those to really deliver on mobility. And then we also have the Global Forum, the Global Council that we just started, which is also looking at equitable access and where we can use policy to drive that.
So, Ami, In preparing for today, we read an article where you said that new innovations can foster peace among communities. And I think if mobility is a human right, that's right up there with grand aspirations that who would want to argue against that? So I would love for you to elucidate, because actually the interview with you I thought was fantastic.
So mobility is a human right, but we all got stuck on the road on every major city that we go. Got stuck. We sit on the road and our human right is stuck in a car for 2 or 3 hours to get from point A to point B. And it's not unique to one state or one country. At the same time, there are multiple changes that happen in the world of opportunity that changing business model, changing technologies, and desire and need to change regulations. And I already gave you my 3 top points. But the difficulties, the challenges, it's not unique to one segment, it's not unique to one country, which means many countries, many different populations have the same challenge, and they all want to address it. No one can address it by himself. No single company, not a single group. It's got to be something holistic that can bring different groups from different ethnic, from different countries, from different population into looking on a big solution. And what you really hurt you today, you can find using technology, using policies, you can find a solution. And if I look here in our friendly neighborhood of the Middle East, right? The challenges that we see here, they see it in Saudi Arabia, the same. Their main cities are already clogged. And what better than to put some brain together and to see that Moovit have a solution for public transportation and beyond. And there are multiple sensors that can address a different way to go. And a different holistic system that unless community will get together, interest will come together, they will get stuck in the problem, will not be able to address the issue. And I think we, the technologists, as a policy maker, need to look on the opportunity that the challenges that we face can create commonality in solution and leverage it.
Thank you. In the next part, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about how. How do we do that?
I'm ready.
So, Nir, you corrected me on the way in. Maybe I get this number right. That Moovit now guides 500 million users globally. It's a pretty extraordinary number. I, by the way, use it all the time in New York. So it's a fantastic, mobility as a service travel app. The question I have for you is that all of the innovation in mobility now, particularly as we move to digital platforms to stitch how people move from place to place, there's a really big movement where people are concerned about their privacy, understandably. And to be able to guide people, the knowledge of knowing where you go, how you get there, what you do along the way, is really valuable currency, right? It's really valuable currency on the online world. So the question is, thematically, if mobility is a human right and innovation can achieve peace, how do we solve one of these big, really thorny questions about you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have all the advantages, but also have privacy. And you and I, we were having a very good discussion about it, so I would love for you to pick up on that theme.
Yeah, so as you said, it's 450 million users around the world in about 2,800 cities. And just before I'm directly going to answer your question, so I think it's a human right, and last week in Redmond we announced with Microsoft how we also provide help with people with disabilities, which is 15% of the population around the world that Moovit supports as well to make it a human right. But back to your question, we do collect today about or more than 5 billion data points every day from you know, Moovit users. And I don't think that we need to have the specific personal information of each and every one of you in order to provide this human right of mobility. What we do need is to aggregate this information and be able to use our mobility as a service platform to allow cities to understand the demand in every hour of the day, every day of the week, and every week of the year. And just to give you a perspective, the pattern of people usage of transportation or mobility in Boston, for example, during snowy day versus rainy day or sunny day is completely different. And the value we're trying to provide cities is not necessarily about any particular person, it's about aggregation. So every piece of information we collect from our users is not being stored as raw data, but it's actually being aggregated statistically to allow us to really understand the pattern and the movement of people within the city and not necessarily tracking and infringing any privacy.
Great, thank you. So now I want to shift gears to seamless intermodal mobility. And the idea behind it, or the concept behind it, it was part of the white paper we wrote with the World Economic Forum 2 years ago and released in Davos that Nir was part of. That we created a manifesto which was about how to catalyze the advent of it, is very much to address the challenge that Ami was talking about, that every city around the globe is mired in incredible congestion tied to a car-centric system where there are all of these subsidies. And in many ways, what we have is a throughput problem as population grows, urbanization, and the inability of governments to actually fund new transportation modes or to modernize their infrastructure. And so one of the really interesting developments is this idea that you can begin to connect all these different modes and help people get from point A to point B, which is a lot of what Moovit does. And then secondly, and in the not too distant future, probably pay a single price across all those different modes and get an electronic ticket. And we're still very early. So what I want to do is now shift into that it's a good idea. It'll help us make mobility a human right. It will help innovation to create progress and social benefit. But the question is how? What is it going to take for all of that to happen? And I think, Nir, I'm going to start with you because you're on the front lines of the really thorny questions, the friction points, as you said, about what it takes to make that happen.
Yeah, so we announced in February about our new algorithms of true multimodality that connects cars or driven cars and transit system, but it's actually more than that. It's connecting all moving parts. And people might think it's an easy challenge, but I just want to share with you a situation where you drive your car to the train and you don't have any idea about traffic and you miss the train in 1 minute. Here you go, you're waiting now 40 minutes for the next train. That's a catastrophe. Or you drive there and you just don't have a parking spot in the train station. On the other side, the last mile, you know, if we are working now with Uber and all the other ride-hailing is the Uber drivers or any other ride-hailing cannot park near a train station, so the connecting point becomes the most problematic friction point. So most of the people still do not see the combination of either ride-hailing or driving their own car and using transit as a legitimate mode of transportation, a smooth mode of transportation. Most people just decide between each side. So the modal split in cities are still, is very much leaning towards driving cars. That's one of the problems. If we could make this trip a much smoother experience, not only regarding the timeline and connectivity, but also regarding payment, that would make all the friction, or most of the friction, go away, and it will become a true option for people. Right now, it's still not there.
Great. Ami, in your role, you've seen many waves of innovation come, right? This has enormous promise. but there's probably a cautionary note in there about what it's really going to take for this very big vision and idea to come about, and all these different stakeholders who don't have natural incentives necessary to break down boundaries, and the technology that may or may not work exactly the way it's envisioned. So I would love to have the benefit of your perspective of, you know, what are the guideposts? What are the things that we could be doing to accelerate this adoption? What are the things we should be really careful about?
Okay. So in my job as a chief scientist, historically the chief scientist in Israel was investing in research and development. If the development was successful, the chief scientist did his job. Today we see that that's not enough, because what you want is that the economy will benefit from that research and development. You want company to grow. You want the average person on the street will value from the new technology. So it's much bigger than just technology. You need to think now holistically. You got to see the entire picture. And if we talk about mobility, then you need to think on the mobility as an entire ecosystem. And what should guide you, as we talk on the way here, that the local community would like to take the solution, we didn't talk about the solution, would like to adopt the solution that you propose. And the solution got to be an entire ecosystem, because if you want to drive from here to Jerusalem, then you need to think how to get from your house into the train station, or think, should it be train station or bus? You come to Jerusalem, you need to think how you get there and how you get to your final destination. And your preference will change depending on the environment. But you need to see at the entire system, tailor it so the average person, the community would like to adopt it. Technology today enables to change the business model entirely, because we already talking about flexible buses. You all heard about Bubble, which the Ministry of Transportation started here in Tel Aviv. And the Bubble take you from point A to point B very flexible. We all heard about Uber. We don't see them in Israel, but I take them a lot in other places. So, but those all building block, no one can predict what will be the holistic solution, because it may change. So in our job, we create all the enablers technologically, being a software, being business model that need, being sensors. I don't know if you know, but we have in Israel more than 500 automotive companies. More than 500. And we don't have even a single tier 1 automotive company. But is really the autonomous car is a solution? When you talk about moving millions of people, it will be a segment, but not the entire solution. The last point that I want to make is, so we talk about the desire of the community. We talk about technology. Now, we need also to make sure that the regulators will be early in the game, and that the regulators will guide and give you guidelines and will be willing to test what he just regulated with some testing that company in the high tech can provide and make correction. That's why Israel Innovation Authority developed a pilot program where high-tech companies go together with, let's say, with the Ministry of Transportation, of Energy, of Environmental, and testing new ideas in Israel environment to be ready to go globally. On top of it, we are creating already a government decision that we will sign agreement, which will be signed in the next 2 weeks with the World Economic Forum, where we will get regulation from all around the world. We will do 1 or 2 testing, if it is on medical, if it is on transportation, and we'll feed the system what was the results of those pilots that we did to correct the regulation that we are talking about. So we take the regulation early on in the game instead of after the fact, later on, where they become just a pain and everyone complains.
So, Michelle, that's a perfect setup. Given the work you're leading and that we're doing on the council to try to create global harmonization of regulations around autonomy and urban mobility, the fact that you've had a chance to travel widely and see a lot of innovation in play, I'm kind of curious about your observations about the model that AMI has put together. How do we actually build a consensus, not only within our communities, but across national boundaries? And how do we collectively advance all of this?
Well, I think what Nir was saying is very important, and that is we cannot manage and plan for that which we don't know. So you really need to have information and data on what users need. Where do they need to go? When do they need to go there? And how can they most efficiently and effectively do that? And that's some of the things that we're looking at in the World Economic Forum. And we're seeing this, that there isn't a single way to do this. There are a bunch of different ways. And you look at places like Los Angeles, which we've talked a lot about, and they're at the leading edge of really digitizing all of their infrastructure, which will help them be able to plan for it. As well as you have places like Amsterdam, which are really looking at building not only smart corridors, but also how to use other multi-modes like bicycles more efficiently and effectively. And then obviously in Helsinki, what they're doing with mobility as a service and integrating. And you take these best practices from all of these places, and then you apply them. Because at the end of the day, mobility is very local. And there are certain things that need to be applied. Now, unfortunately, congestion is global. And that's really dealing with throughput, changing some of the vehicle form factors and how we move these, and actually recognizing the true cost, not just in public transit, but also in private transit, and exposing those to actually better allocate our resources. Those are the types of things that we're working at with our partners on.
I think one comment is the solutions are not going to be the same across the different countries. It will be tailored. What it will create, the different country can learn from each other what was their solution, and company can know before they go globally which product they need to tailor for that regulation and for that country and for that country. Yeah. So it's win-win on both sides.
What we're seeing is when you travel around the globe and you go into meetings with either industry, NGOs, the R&D, technologists, or governments, there's a lot of the same dialogue going on and a lot of the same sort of how do I break through these challenges. And that's where the value of these best practices and insights can maybe shorten some of the development time and the adoption time. And that's why the work that the forum's doing is so important around all of this.
It's even worse than that, I would say, because the private sector continuously, and I come from there, continuously say, leave me alone from the government. Just let me deal with it without the government. And that's one of the problems, because if regulation comes too late in the game, then you're stuck. And again, it's regulation to help, to make it better, to make it more efficient, to make it more economic. And I think we broke it here in Israel because we already working with the private sector together with the government on multiple ministry that already running in the pilot program that we have.
So there are
all sorts, major accomplishment.
There are all sorts of different models, and I want to ask each of you the same question. And you can pick your geographic unit. If you were mobility czar, you had authority for the system of systems in the ecosystem, which, by the way, there isn't one on the globe. Maybe Singapore comes the closest. What would you do to move the needle? One thing to actually move the needle.
So I think,
and you're the voice of the private sector here.
Yeah,
so.
I'm the voice of the private sector, but I also have a very unique perspective. I mean, I'm looking at almost 3,000 cities around the world, and I'm looking at their data pretty equally. And one of the things we see everywhere is the fact that there is an instrumental problem with low density areas, suburbs. Within the suburbs, there is no way you can solve mobility problems with the form factor of a bus, which is 50 seaters. And we see that there's clearly a way to move the needle or change mobility within the suburbs by make the ability to get to the grid, the train stations, the subway stations, or the buses, using small form factors. So I don't know if you're aware of it, but in many countries, the subsidy for public transit is between 70 to 90%. If only 10 or 20% of this subsidy will be diverted into a small form factors, micro-mobility, maybe private companies, maybe not, maybe semi-private, we could create a situation where less and less people will keep a second car just to drive it to the train, and more people will get solution for their first mile, last mile problem. I think that shifting of subsidy can really change the world of mobility in the most immediate way, rather than building infrastructure.
Ami.
In my mind, technology today, technology of computing, of artificial intelligence, can provide a lot of tools that we never had before. And in my mind, we need to look on, I called it, with the courage and brave enough to come up with completely different thinking. We all like and we're all afraid from changes, but change is coming at us. And we need to do the big change, but I don't say to do it on the entire country. I don't say even to do it on the entire city. What I say is to do it, to come with a big idea like we do with the bubble, like we do, try it. And try see what the problem you face. Don't give up because you have a problem. Fix the problem, see how to address it, and move on. If you look how this gadget was developed, it was not look like this 15 years ago. It looks very different. And it went step by step. Correction, get feedback from the customer. That's what I say. Customer and the community need to like to do what you propose them and correct it accordingly. Be very, very tuned. But don't be afraid to make a major changes. Even that large company who already in the market will always push back against changes, always. And you need to know how to overcome it.
So, Madam Czar.
At the heart of it is the users. And if you're not meeting their demands, then we have all failed. And I think a lot of the discussions we have about mobility actually fails to take in the voice of the diversity of demands. Like, for example, I'm going to be a little biased here, but women's mobility needs are actually different than a lot of the options that are available. Women do tend to pay a lot more for mobility and actually reject a lot of public transportation because it isn't safe. And that needs to change. And that obviously goes with changing men's behavior more than it is a technological solution. But there are other aspects of it, which are the sustainability and looking at alternative powertrains, not necessarily just electric, but different types of powertrain need to go into that as well. And you're right, we are at a technological breakthrough where we can apply a lot of artificial intelligence, analytics, and changing of form factors to break through fundamentally in some of these areas where it has not been economical or sustainable to be providing this transportation. And that's, I think, one of the most exciting areas is changing the form factor, getting away from fixed routes to more dynamic routes is going to be incredible.
So coming full circle to where we started, the world is changing really rapidly, much faster probably than we as humans are willing to accommodate. The technology is going to keep going. We need to build a community, to build consensus, to come at this collectively, to think about the users, to make sure that mobility is a human right, to help sort of create greater efficiencies at lower cost with greater effect. That's the collective. I've probably left out 10 other things, but cleaner, more sustainable, and that's where we're heading. So I want to thank my very good friends, Michelle, Ami, Nir, for this conversation. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.